I thought I was being romantic when I left work 3 hours early that December evening. The Christmas concert tickets burned in my jacket pocket as I climbed the stairs to our apartment, already imagining Sarah's surprise smile when I surprised her with the Bach performance she'd mentioned wanting to attend. The hallway felt unusually quiet, and I noticed her car keys were missing from the hook by the door. Strange. I pushed open our bedroom door and froze. Sarah was tangled in our sheets with my younger brother Jake, both completely naked and lost in each other. Time stopped. Sarah's scream pierced the silence as Jake scrambled upright, his face flushed with panic and guilt. The concert tickets scattered across the hardwood floor like fallen snow as my hands went numb. I turned without speaking and walked straight out of the apartment. My legs carried me down 4 flights of stairs while my mind refused to process what I'd witnessed. The December air hit my face like a slap, but I welcomed the sharp cold against the burning sensation behind my eyes. I climbed into my truck and drove aimlessly through neighborhoods I'd known since childhood, past the elementary school where Jake and I had played together, past the park where we'd learned to ride bikes. 2 hours later, I found myself sitting in an empty diner booth, staring at black coffee that had gone cold. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus, my best friend since college. His voicemail picked up immediately. "Marcus, it's Barton. Something terrible happened. Call me back when you get this." I hung up and stared at the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, approached my table. "You look like someone who's had the worst day of his life," she said gently. "Can I get you some fresh coffee?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. When she returned with a steaming cup, I managed to whisper, "Thank you." The drive back to the apartment felt like traveling through quicksand. Jake's beat-up Honda Civic still sat in the parking lot, mocking me with its presence. I climbed the stairs again, each step heavier than the last. Through the thin door, I could hear Sarah's voice, high and desperate. "Barton, please, let me explain. This isn't what you think." I leaned against the doorframe, my forehead pressed against the cool wood. "What I think, Sarah, is that I saw my brother inside you. What explanation could possibly change that?" Her sobs grew louder. "It was a mistake. A horrible mistake. Jake came over upset about losing his job, and we were drinking wine, and one thing led to another. I never meant for this to happen." I packed a single duffel bag with clothes and toiletries while she pleaded through the bathroom door. The engagement ring she'd left on the nightstand caught the lamplight, winking at me like an accusation. I left it there and walked out. The Comfort Inn on Highway 12 became my refuge for the night. I lay on the scratchy bedspread, fully clothed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a question mark. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from Sarah, then Jake, then Sarah again. I turned it off and fell into a restless sleep, filled with fragments of memories. Jake's proud grin when he'd graduated high school, Sarah laughing at one of his terrible jokes at last Thanksgiving dinner, the way my parents always lit up when he walked into a room. The next morning brought reality crashing back. I showered, put on yesterday's wrinkled shirt, and drove to Pinnacle Marketing, the advertising firm where I'd worked for the past 4 years. My supervisor, Glenn Patterson, took one look at my face and closed his office door. "Rough night, Barton." "You could say that." I slumped into the chair across from his desk. "I need to focus on work today. Whatever it takes to keep my mind occupied." Glenn nodded, understanding. "We've got the Henderson campaign presentation at 2. Want to take point on it?" I threw myself into preparing slides and reviewing market research, grateful for the distraction. But at 11:30, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jake's name. "Barton, we need to talk. I'm in the parking lot." My stomach clenched. "I have nothing to say to you." 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Against my better judgment, I walked outside. Jake leaned against his car, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. His sandy hair stuck up at odd angles, and dark circles shadowed his usually bright blue eyes. For a moment, he looked like the little brother who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "I know you hate me right now. He started, his voice shaking. I hate myself, but I need you to understand what happened. I crossed my arms and waited. Sarah's been unhappy for months, Barton. She told me she felt like you were taking her for granted, working late every night, never making time for just the two of you anymore. The words hit like physical blows. So you decided to comfort her? Jake's composure cracked. It started with conversations. She'd call when she was lonely and I'd listen. I know how that sounds, but I was just trying to be a good friend to her. And to you. A good friend. I tasted bile. Is that what you call sleeping with your brother's fiancée? It just happened. Jake's voice rose, drawing stares from co-workers heading to lunch. We were talking about her feelings and she started crying and I put my arm around her to comfort her and then you decided to stick your tongue down her throat. Jake flinched. I was drunk, Barton. We both were. I know that's not an excuse, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I studied my brother's face, searching for genuine remorse for the Jake I'd grown up protecting and defending. Instead, I saw calculation behind his tears. How long? I asked quietly. How long, what? How long have you been sleeping with my fiancée? Jake's silence stretched between us like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. 3 months. The parking lot seemed to tilt sideways. 3 months. Not a drunken mistake or a moment of weakness. A deliberate, sustained betrayal. Sarah wanted to tell you, Jake continued quickly. But I convinced her to wait until after the holidays. I didn't want to ruin Christmas for the family. I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. How thoughtful of you both. Jake stepped closer, his expression shifting to something I'd never seen before. Not shame or regret, but something almost like defiance. I love her, Barton. I know that sounds impossible, but I do, and she loves me too. The world stopped spinning. Huh, what did you say? We didn't plan this. Neither of us wanted to hurt you. But sometimes love just happens and you can't control it. I stared at this stranger wearing my brother's face. Are you asking me to step aside? Jake's shoulders straightened. I'm asking you to think about what's best for everyone. Sarah's miserable with you. She lights up when she's with me. Maybe this is just the universe's way of fixing a mistake before you two made a bigger one by getting married. For the family's sake, I repeated slowly. For everyone's sake. You deserve someone who loves you completely, not someone who's settling because she thinks she should. I turned and walked back toward the building without another word. Behind me, I heard Jake call my name, but I didn't stop. I had a presentation to give, work to complete, a life to somehow continue living. But as I sat through the Henderson campaign meeting, nodding at appropriate moments and taking notes I'd never read again, one thought echoed in my mind. My brother wasn't sorry he'd betrayed me. He was sorry he'd gotten caught. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp winter morning that usually filled me with optimism. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the motel bathroom mirror, practicing normal expressions for the conversation I dreaded. My mother had called 6 times since Friday, each voicemail escalating in urgency and maternal concern. Barton Thomas Mitchell, you call me back this instant. Sarah explained everything and we need to discuss this as a family. The use of my full name meant business. I'd avoided their calls long enough. I drove through familiar suburbs where Christmas lights twinkled from every porch and inflatable snowmen dotted front yards. The house I'd grown up in looked exactly the same. White colonial with green shutters, my father's workshop light glowing in the garage, my mother's ceramic angels arranged on the front porch. But when I pulled into the driveway, Jake's Honda Civic was already there. My stomach dropped. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes, watching my breath fog the windows before finally walking to the front door. My mother Linda opened it before I could knock. Her steel gray hair was perfectly styled and she wore the burgundy sweater I'd bought her last Christmas. There's my boy. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and disappointment. Come in, come in. It's freezing out there. The living room looked like a Norman Rockwell painting fire crackling in the fireplace Christmas tree, twinkling in the corner the scent of my mother's famous pot roast drifting from the kitchen. And there, sitting on the couch like they belonged, there were Jake and Sarah. Sarah had been crying. Her usually perfect blonde hair hung limp around her shoulders, and she clutched a tissue like a lifeline. Jake sat close enough to touch her, his hand resting protectively on the couch behind her shoulders. Barton. My father Dan emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His weathered face bore the expression he'd worn when mediating our childhood fights. "Glad you came." I remained standing. "I didn't know we were having a group therapy session." "Sit down, honey." My mother guided me toward the armchair opposite the couch. "We need to work this out as a family." Aunt Carol and Uncle Pete emerged from the dining room, their faces arranged in matching expressions of concerned sympathy. The ambush was complete. Now then, my father began settling into his recliner with the authority of a man accustomed to solving problems with common sense and firm handshakes. I've heard all sides of this situation, and while it's certainly complicated, it's not insurmountable. I looked around the room at these people who'd shaped my entire life. All sides. Interesting way to put it. Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice small and tremulous. "Barton, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen. You never meant to sleep with my brother for 3 months." My mother's sharp intake of breath cut through the room. "Barton Thomas, there's no need for crude language." Crude language. I stood up my chair, rocking back. "Mom, they had an affair. A sustained, deliberate affair. What language would you prefer I use?" Uncle Pete cleared his throat. "Son, anger doesn't solve anything. These two young people made a mistake, but they're trying to make it right." "Make it right, how exactly?" Jake finally spoke, his voice steady in a way that made my skin crawl. "By being honest about our feelings. By not living a lie anymore." "A lie." I looked at Sarah. "Is that what our engagement was? A lie?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I thought I loved you. I tried to love you the way you deserved. But what I feel for Jake, it's different. Stronger. I can't help how I feel." My mother leaned forward in her chair. "Barton, honey, you're 28 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. Wouldn't you rather know now that Sarah's heart belongs to someone else than find out after you're married with children?" The logic was so twisted, so perfectly packaged to make me the unreasonable one that I almost admired it. And that someone else just happens to be my brother. "These things happen," Aunt Carol chimed in, her voice dripping with false wisdom. "Love doesn't follow rules or schedules. Sometimes the heart wants what the heart wants." I looked at Jake, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not guilt, not shame, but something closer to satisfaction. "Tell me, Jake, when exactly did your heart start wanting my fiancée?" "It wasn't like that," he protested. "It developed slowly, naturally. Sarah and I have always had a connection, but we never acted on it until recently." "A connection?" I repeated the word like it tasted rotten. "You mean when she was 16 and you were 14 and she was dating me in high school?" Sarah's face flushed red. "That was completely innocent. We were kids." "But the connection was there," I pressed. "Even then." The silence that followed confirmed everything I needed to know. My father stood up, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Barton, I understand you're hurt. But you need to stop acting like a victim and start thinking about what's best for everyone involved." "What's best for everyone?" "Sarah has realized she made a mistake getting engaged to you. Jake has realized he loves her. They're trying to handle this situation with as much dignity as possible, and you're making it harder than it needs to be." I looked around the room again, taking in the faces of my family. People who'd attended my high school graduation, cheered at my college commencement, celebrated my promotion at work. People who were now asking me to step aside gracefully while my brother stole my life. You've already decided, I said quietly. All of you. You've decided that Jake and Sarah belong together, and I'm just the obstacle standing in the way of true love. That's not fair, my mother protested. We love you both equally. Equally. I tasted the word. That's interesting, Mom, because I seem to remember a lot of situations growing up where things weren't quite equal. Jake's face darkened. Don't start with that childhood grievance bullshit, Barton. We're adults now. Are we? Because this feels a lot like when you broke my science fair project in 8th grade and convinced Mom and Dad it was an accident, or when you crashed my car senior year and somehow made it my fault for lending it to you. That's ancient history, my father snapped. We're talking about the present. The present where you've all chosen sides and I'm on the losing team. Sarah stood up suddenly, fresh tears streaming down her face. I can't do this anymore. Barton, I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to end our engagement before I developed feelings for Jake. But I can't keep apologizing for falling in love. She ran from the room and Jake immediately followed her. I could hear their muffled voices in the kitchen, his comforting her thanking him for standing by her. My mother shook her head sadly. Look what you've done. That poor girl is beside herself with guilt. That poor girl cheated on me with my brother for 3 months. Mistakes were made, Uncle Pete said diplomatically, but holding on to anger isn't going to change anything. You need to forgive and move forward. For the family's sake, my father added, Christmas is in 2 weeks. We're not going to let this destroy the holidays. A cold certainty settled in my chest. What are you saying? My mother and father exchanged a look I'd seen 1,000 times before the silent communication of parents managing their children. We're saying that Jake and Sarah will be here for Christmas dinner, my mother announced. They're both family and family sticks together through difficult times. They're both family. Sarah may not be your fiancée anymore, but she's been part of this family for 2 years. We're not going to abandon her because the romantic situation changed. I stared at these people who'd raised me, looking for any sign of the parents who'd taught me about loyalty and integrity and doing the right thing. Instead, I found strangers who'd rewritten history to accommodate betrayal. And if I object to having Christmas dinner with the woman who cheated on me and the brother who stabbed me in the back, then you'll be choosing anger over love, my father said firmly. And that would be a shame because you're better than that. Jake and Sarah returned from the kitchen, their faces composed but their hands intertwined. The sight of their fingers laced together so casual and natural hit me like a physical blow. Barton, Jake said carefully, I know this is hard, but we're going to be together regardless. The question is whether our family survives this intact or gets torn apart by bitterness. Our family. You'll always be my brother. Nothing can change that. I looked at Jake holding Sarah's hand, at my parents nodding approvingly, at my aunt and uncle beaming like they'd just witnessed something beautiful instead of something devastating. Actually, I said quietly, something already has changed that. But as I drove away from the house where I'd learned to walk and talk and believe in the fundamental goodness of the people who loved me, I realized the worst was yet to come. Because my mother called that evening with an announcement that shattered what remained of my faith in my family. We've decided to host a small commitment ceremony for Jake and Sarah on Christmas Eve, she said brightly. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends, a celebration of their love and new beginning. A commitment ceremony on Christmas Eve. We thought it would be a beautiful way to turn something painful into something joyful. And Barton, we really hope you'll be there to support them. I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of my motel room, finally understanding that my family hadn't just chosen sides. They'd chosen a completely different reality than the one I was living in. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and the kind of crystalline cold that made everything look like a greeting card. I sat in my truck outside my childhood home for 20 minutes, watching my relatives arrive through frost-covered windows. Cousin Jennifer's minivan. Uncle Robert's pickup. Cars I'd seen at every holiday gathering since I could remember. I'd promised myself I wouldn't come. Spent 3 sleepless nights planning how I'd spend Christmas alone, maybe volunteering at a soup kitchen, or driving somewhere far away. But some masochistic part of me needed to see how completely they'd erase me from the story. The house glowed with warmth and celebration. Through the windows I could see figures moving around the living room, hear muffled laughter and conversation. My nephew Tyler ran past the window wearing the Batman costume I'd bought him for his birthday. Life continuing without me exactly as it always had when I wasn't the center of attention. I finally gathered the courage to walk to the front door. My mother opened it wearing her best holiday dress, her face bright with genuine pleasure. "Barton, I'm so glad you came. Everyone's here." The living room buzzed with relatives I'd known my entire life. Cousin Jennifer balanced baby Emma on her hip while discussing preschool options with Aunt Margaret. Uncle Robert argued good-naturedly with Grandpa Thomas about the merits of different football teams. The Christmas tree sparkled with ornaments I'd helped hang since childhood, including the macaroni angel I'd made in 2nd grade. And there holding court near the fireplace were Jake and Sarah. Sarah wore a cream-colored dress that caught the firelight beautifully. Her engagement ring was gone, replaced by a delicate gold band I'd never seen before. Jake stood beside her in his best suit, his arm around her waist with easy familiarity. They looked like they'd been together for years instead of months. "Barton." Cousin Jennifer approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How are you holding up?" The question confused me. Holding up? You know, with everything that's happened, it must be difficult. I glanced around the room, suddenly aware that conversations had quieted when I entered. People were watching me with expressions of careful sympathy, the kind reserved for someone recovering from illness or unemployment. "What exactly do you think happened, Jennifer?" She shifted baby Emma to her other hip, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, Sarah realized she had feelings for Jake and you decided to be gracious about it. Mom said you've been really mature through this whole transition." Transition. Like my fiancé sleeping with my brother was a career change or a move to a new city. That's one way to put it. Uncle Robert clapped me on the shoulder with the hearty familiarity of someone who'd watched me grow up. Takes a big man to step aside when he realizes two people are meant for each other. Your parents raised you right. I stared at him, searching for any sign he was joking. "Is that what you think happened?" Sarah explained the whole situation to your mother. Said she realized she'd been trying to force feelings that weren't there, and when she fell for Jake, you encouraged her to follow her heart. I encouraged her. Course you did. You want your brother to be happy, and if Sarah makes him happy, then everybody wins. Across the room, my grandfather caught my eye and nodded approvingly. Grandpa Thomas had always been my hero. World War II veteran, successful businessman, the kind of man who built things with his hands and solved problems with integrity. If he was proud of how I'd handled this situation, then the story must have been thoroughly rewritten. I walked over to where he sat in his customary armchair, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Grandpa." "Barton." He gestured for me to sit on the ottoman beside his chair. "Come here, son." I settled beside him, close enough to smell his aftershave and see the deep lines around his eyes. "Your father told me what happened," he said quietly. "I want you to know how proud I am of the way you've handled this situation." Proud. Takes character to put family first when your pride wants you to be selfish. Jake's always struggled to find his place in the world, and Sarah's giving him something to fight for. You did the right thing stepping back and letting them be together. I stared into his weathered face, seeing the same gentle strength that had guided me through childhood scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. "Grandpa, do you really believe that's what happened?" "I believe you're a better man than to let jealousy destroy your family, so I always known you had that strength in you." Before I could respond, my mother called for attention from the center of the room. She stood beside the Christmas tree, holding a small wrapped box, her face glowing with excitement. "Before we sit down for dinner, there's something special we want to share with everyone." Jake and Sarah moved to stand beside her, their faces bright with anticipation. My stomach clenched with sudden dread. As most of you know, the past few months have brought some changes to our family. Sometimes love surprises us, and we have to be brave enough to embrace it even when it's complicated. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I noticed several relatives glancing at me with approving smiles, as if I deserved credit for this moment of wisdom. Tonight, we want to celebrate Jake and Sarah's commitment to each other with a symbol that's been in our family for 3 generations. She opened the small box, revealing a diamond ring that made my vision blur around the edges. My grandmother's engagement ring. The one I'd planned to surprise Sarah with after Christmas, trading up from the modest band I'd been able to afford 2 years ago. This ring belonged to my mother and her mother before that. It represents the kind of love that lasts through good times, and bad the kind of love that Jake and Sarah have found together. Jake took the ring from the box with reverent hands. Sarah extended her left hand, tears streaming down her face. As he slipped the diamond onto her finger, the room erupted in applause. To Jake and Sarah, my father announced, raising his glass of wine, "May your love bring you the same joy it brings to all of us." Everyone raised their glasses. Cousin Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. Uncle Robert nodded approval. Aunt Margaret beamed like she was watching her own children get engaged. And my mother, my own mother, who'd rocked me to sleep and bandaged my wounds and promised that family always came, first looked directly at me with an expression of pure triumph. "I'm so grateful that we're all here together to celebrate this moment," she continued. "It means the world to Jake and Sarah to have their family's blessing." Jake cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to thank everyone for supporting us through this transition. It hasn't been easy, but having family who loves us enough to embrace change, that means everything." He looked directly at me, especially my brother, who showed me what real love looks like by wanting Sarah and me to be happy more than he wanted to hold on to the past. The room turned to look at me expectantly. Faces I'd known and loved my entire life waited for me to complete the narrative they'd constructed, to play my assigned role as the noble ex-fiancé who'd graciously stepped aside for true love. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. "Barton, I know this isn't easy for you, but your generosity and maturity through all of this, I'll never forget that." The silence stretched longer. Someone coughed. Baby Emma made gurgling sounds that seemed unnaturally loud. Finally, my mother spoke. "Barton, would you like to say something?" I looked around the room at these people who'd shaped every Christmas memory I had. At the tree where my ornament still hung. At the fireplace where my stocking had been replaced by Sarah's. At the grandfather I'd idolized, the cousins I'd grown up with. The parents who taught me that lying was wrong and loyalty mattered and family meant something sacred. "I think," I said carefully, "that this is exactly what everyone deserves." My mother's smile could have powered the Christmas lights. "Oh, honey, you're going to make me cry." But as the party continued around me, as relatives clapped my shoulder and praised my maturity and told me what a good brother I was, being one terrible truth crystallized in my mind. They weren't just rewriting history, they were erasing me from it entirely. And when my mother announced that Jake and Sarah would be moving into my old bedroom upstairs until they found a place of their own, because it only makes sense to keep the family together, I realized that my complete disappearance had been the plan all along. I left Christmas dinner without saying goodbye, walked out through the kitchen while everyone was gathered around the piano singing carols, their voices blending in harmonies I'd once been part of. My mother's car keys hung on the hook where mine used to hang when I lived there. Jake's jacket was draped over the chair where I'd done homework every night for 12 years. I drove straight to the bank the next morning when it opened, transferred my savings to a new account, and withdrew everything in cash. Quit my job with a 2-sentence email to Glenn Patterson that cited personal reasons and thanked him for everything. Spent 3 days packing my apartment into boxes that I donated to Goodwill, except for 2 suitcases of essentials. Sarah's engagement ring still sat on the nightstand where I'd left it. I wrapped it in tissue paper and mailed it to her at my parents' house with no note. Portland, Oregon called to me for reasons I couldn't articulate. Maybe because it was 3,000 miles away. Maybe because I'd never been there and had no memories to contaminate. Maybe because the mountains and ocean promised something vast enough to swallow my pain. I found a furnished studio apartment in the Pearl District and paid 3 months' rent in advance. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, asked no questions about my lack of references or employment history. Just looked at the cash in my hand and gave me the keys. "Fresh start?" she asked with knowing eyes. Something like that. The first month was pure survival. I walked the city for hours every day, learning neighborhoods and bus routes and coffee shops that made me feel anonymous. Applied for jobs online from the library, crafting a resume that emphasized my marketing experience while explaining my sudden availability in vague terms. TechFlow Solutions hired me as a digital marketing coordinator after a video interview where I convinced them my geographic flexibility was an asset. The startup occupied 2 floors of a converted warehouse in southeast Portland, all exposed brick and standing desks and employees young enough to think staying until 9 p.m. was normal. My supervisor, Rachel Torres, was a 30-something dynamo with purple hair and more energy than should be legal before 10 a.m. She introduced me to the team on my first day like I was joining a family instead of taking a job. "This is Barton, our new marketing guru. He's escaped from the East Coast to join our mission of helping small businesses dominate their markets." "What brought you to Portland?" asked Kevin Walsh, a software developer whose desk was decorated with action figures from movies I didn't recognize. "Change of scenery." I answered, which was technically true. Work became my refuge. TechFlow's clients were eclectic artisan coffee roasters, boutique fitness studios, handmade jewelry designers. People who'd built businesses around passion rather than profit, who needed help telling their stories to the world. I threw myself into their campaigns with something approaching desperation. "You work like someone running from something," Rachel observed one evening as we finished a presentation for a client meeting the next morning. "Aren't we all?" She studied my face with the direct gaze of someone accustomed to reading people. "Some of us are running toward something instead. Might be worth figuring out which one you're doing." 3 weeks into the job, I joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning at the REI store downtown. The group consisted mostly of transplants like myself, refugees from corporate jobs and broken relationships in cities that had stopped feeling like home. Our leader was Elena Vasquez, a veterinarian whose Saturday passion was introducing newcomers to the natural beauty surrounding Portland. She had the kind of quiet confidence that made following her up mountain trails feel safe, and the kind of laugh that made everyone else want to laugh too. First time in the Pacific Northwest, she asked during my initial hike up Forest Park. "First time anywhere, really. I've lived within 50 miles of where I was born my entire life until 6 weeks ago." What changed? I considered various answers: job opportunity, adventure, wanderlust. Instead, I found myself telling the truth. I discovered that the people I thought knew me best actually didn't know me at all. Elena nodded, like that made perfect sense. Sometimes we have to go far away to find out who we really are. The hiking group became my social foundation. Every Saturday, we'd explore a different trail: the Columbia River Gorge, Mount Hood National Forest, the Oregon coast. I learned to identify Douglas fir trees and spotted owls and felt my body grow stronger with each climb. I also learned that I was funnier than I'd ever been allowed to be at family gatherings, that I had opinions about art and music and politics that didn't need to be tempered for other people's comfort, that I could make decisions based purely on what I wanted without calculating how they'd affect everyone else's happiness. "You're becoming a different person," Elena observed one evening as we shared a pitcher of beer after a particularly challenging hike. "More yourself, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. For 28 years, I'd been Barton, the responsible older brother, Barton, the reliable employee, Barton, the accommodating boyfriend who kept everyone else comfortable. Now, I was just Barton, figuring out what that meant. I started cooking elaborate meals for myself, experimenting with cuisines I'd never tried because Sarah preferred simple food. Enrolled in a pottery class at the community college because I'd always been curious about working with my hands. Volunteered at the Oregon Humane Society on Sunday afternoons, finding peace in the simple act of walking abandoned dogs and helping them remember how to trust humans. Dr. Patricia Steinberg's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building overlooking Pioneer Courthouse Square. I'd resisted therapy for months, telling myself I was fine, I was moving forward, I was building a new life. But Elena's gentle suggestion that someone objective to talk through everything might be helpful finally broke through my stubbornness. Dr. Steinberg was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the stern authority figure I'd imagined, she was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an office filled with plants and artwork that made talking feel natural. "Tell me about your family," she said during our first session. For an hour, I described the Christmases and birthdays and graduations that had shaped my understanding of love and loyalty. The way my parents had always expected me to be the mature one, the responsible one, the one who sacrificed for everyone else's happiness. "And how did you feel about that role?" I thought it meant they trusted me, that they knew I was strong enough to handle whatever they needed. And now, I stared out the window at people hurrying through the square below, bundled in coats against the February rain. Now, I think it meant I was expendable. Week after week, I untangled the threads of my family's dysfunction with Dr. Steinberg's help, the way they'd always minimized my achievements while celebrating Jake's mediocre efforts. How I'd been expected to be grateful for scraps of attention while he received unconditional adoration. The pattern of making me responsible for his mistakes and their consequences. Families often have an identified scapegoat, Dr. Steinberg explained, someone who gets blamed when things go wrong and whose needs are consistently sacrificed for the supposed greater good. But they love me. They've always said they love me. I'm sure they believe they do. But love isn't just a feeling, Barton. It's a series of choices and actions. What do their choices and actions tell you about how they value you? I couldn't answer that question without crying. Spring in Portland was a revelation. After the gray months of winter, the city exploded into bloom with cherry blossoms and tulips and sunshine that made everything possible. The hiking group expanded to include camping trips and rock climbing adventures. My work at TechFlow evolved into managing major campaigns and mentoring new hires. And Elena became something more than a friend. It happened gradually, naturally, without the drama and intensity that had marked my relationship with Sarah. Coffee after hikes turned into dinner before movies turned into spending entire weekends exploring the coast together. Elena knew the broad strokes of why I'd left my old life behind, but she never pushed for details or tried to fix my pain. She just offered her presence and let me discover who I was becoming. "You know what I love about you," she said one evening as we watched the sunset from her apartment's rooftop deck. "You don't need me to complete you. You're already whole." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. 8 months after leaving everything behind, I was walking dogs at the Humane Society when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Aunt Carol's name, which confused me because I'd blocked my immediate family's numbers months ago. "Barton, thank God I found you. I got your number from that marketing company you work for." Her voice sounded strange, high-pitched, and urgent in a way that made my stomach clench. "What's wrong, Aunt Carol?" "Everything. Everything's wrong, and your family needs you to come home." I sat down on a bench outside the shelter, a golden retriever named Buddy settling at my feet. "What happened?" "Jake's been arrested. Embezzlement. He's been stealing from your father's construction company for months, maybe longer. The police came to the house yesterday morning with a warrant." The world tilted sideways. Stealing money. $60,000, they think. Maybe more. He was taking cash payments from clients and not recording them, skimming from supply budgets, all kinds of things. Your father's business partners are talking about pressing charges and dissolving the company. I tried to process this information while Buddy pressed his warm body against my leg, sensing my distress. "Where is he now?" "Out on bail, but barely. Your parents had to mortgage the house to pay for his lawyer, and Barton." Her voice broke. "Sarah left him. Took off with his business partner, some guy named Marcus Rodriguez, who Jake brought in to help with the books. Turns out they'd been planning this together, cleaning out accounts and setting Jake up to take the fall." Marcus. The same name as my best friend from college, though, surely a coincidence. My head spun, trying to follow the betrayals within betrayals. Your mother's beside herself. Your father had a mild heart attack from the stress. Nothing serious, but he's in the hospital for observation. Everyone's asking where you are and why you haven't come home to help." I closed my eyes and felt the Oregon sun on my face, heard the sound of dogs barking playfully in the yard behind me. "I don't live there anymore, Aunt Carol. But you're still family. Whatever happened between you and Jake, whatever issues you had, this is bigger than that. Your family needs you. My family chose Jake and Sarah over me 8 months ago. They can handle the consequences of that choice." "Barton, please. I know things were complicated, but—" "Complicated." I stood up, causing Buddy to wag his tail hopefully. "Is that what we're calling it? Your mother is devastated. She keeps saying if only you were here, you'd know how to fix this. You were always the smart one, the responsible one." The responsible one, even now, even after everything they wanted me to come back and clean up Jake's mess. "Tell me something, Aunt Carol. Did Jake actually steal that money to impress Sarah? To buy her things and take her places she couldn't afford?" The long silence told me everything. "The police think so. They found credit card statements for expensive restaurants, jewelry trips to Las Vegas and San Francisco, all charged to business accounts." I laughed, a sound that startled Buddy into tilting his head curiously. "So he stole from his own father to woo his brother's fiancée. That's actually perfect. It's not funny, Barton. It's hilarious. It's the most Jake thing he could possibly do. Please come home. Please. Your family is falling apart, and you're the only one who might be able to put it back together." I hung up the phone and sat in the sunshine for an hour watching volunteers play with rescued animals while my mind processed this new information. Everything I'd built in Portland felt suddenly fragile, threatened by the gravitational pull of old loyalties and familial obligation. But when Elena arrived to pick me up for dinner, took one look at my face and asked what was wrong, I found myself telling her everything. The whole story from beginning to end without editing or softening or protecting anyone's feelings. "So what are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. I looked at this woman who'd helped me discover who I could be when I wasn't managing everyone else's emotions and fixing everyone else's problems. "Absolutely nothing," I said. "I'm going to do absolutely nothing at all." "Good," Elena said, and kissed me like I'd just given the right answer to the most important question in the world. Elena's veterinary clinic occupied a converted house in the Alberta Arts District, all hardwood floors, and exposed beams that made even routine pet checkups feel warm and welcoming. I was helping her organize inventory after closing time when Mrs. Chen, my landlord, called with concern in her voice. "Barton, there's a woman here asking about you. Says she's your mother. I told her I don't give out tenant information, but she's very upset." My blood went cold. "She's there now. Sitting on your stoop, crying. Been here for 2 hours. I feel bad for her, but I don't feel comfortable letting her wait inside." I looked at Elena, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. "I'll be right there," I told Mrs. Chen. Elena grabbed her keys. "I'm coming with you." We drove through the city in silence, my mind racing through possibilities. How had my mother found me? What was she doing in Portland, and why now, after 8 months of perfect separation? Sure enough, Linda Mitchell sat on the front steps of my apartment building, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Her usually perfect hair hung limply around her shoulders, and her clothes were wrinkled like she'd been traveling for days. She stood when she saw me approach, her face lighting up with desperate relief. "Barton, oh, thank God. I was starting to think you wouldn't come. How did you find me?" "I hired someone, a private investigator. It took weeks, but he tracked you down through your job and this address." She glanced at Elena with curiosity and suspicion. "Who's your friend?" "Elena. She's—" I struggled for words that would encompass what Elena meant to me. "She's important." Elena stepped forward with professional composure. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've heard about you." The words were polite, but something in Elena's tone made my mother straighten defensively. "I need to talk to my son privately. Family business. Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of Elena." My mother's composure cracked. "Please, Barton, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Against my better judgment, I gestured toward a coffee shop across the street. Elena squeezed my hand before letting me walk away. "I'll wait in the car," she said quietly. "Take all the time you need." The coffee shop was nearly empty, just a few students with laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper. My mother ordered decaf coffee with shaking hands while I got nothing too nervous to drink anything. "You look good," she said when we settled into a corner booth. "Healthy, different. Different how? Older, more serious, like you've been through something difficult." I almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that." She reached across the table toward my hands, then thought better of it and pulled back. "Barton, I know you're angry with us. You have every right to be. But your family needs you." "I don't have a family anymore. You made that clear at Christmas." "That's not true. You'll always be our son, always be Jake's brother." Jake's brother. I tasted the words like poison. The brother whose fiancée he stole. The brother whose life he destroyed. He didn't destroy your life. Look around you. She gestured at the bustling coffee shop, the city beyond the windows. You've built something new. Something good. No thanks to any of you. Her eyes filled with tears. We made mistakes. I can see that now. We should have handled things differently, been more sensitive to your feelings. More sensitive to my feelings. I shook my head. "Mom, you gave my grandmother's engagement ring to the woman who cheated on me with my brother, at Christmas dinner, while praising me for being mature about it. We thought you were okay with it. You seemed to accept what happened. I seemed to accept it because you gave me no other choice. You'd already decided that Jake and Sarah belonged together, and my feelings didn't matter." She dabbed her eyes with a napkin, smearing her mascara. "Maybe we did rush things. Maybe we should have given you more time to process everything. But Barton, what's done is done. Jake and Sarah are over now, and your family is falling apart. Tell me about the embezzlement." Her face crumpled. $63,000. That's what the accountants found so far, but they think there might be more. He was skimming cash payments, inflating supply costs, all kinds of schemes. Your father's partners want to dissolve the company and sue for damages. And Sarah, gone, disappeared with Marcus Rodriguez, Jake's business partner. Turns out they'd been planning this for months, maybe from the beginning. They used Jake to gain access to the company accounts, then set him up to take the blame. I tried to feel satisfaction at this news, some sense of cosmic justice being served. Instead, I felt only empty recognition of patterns playing out exactly as they always had. So Jake was the mark, not the mastermind. He was in love. He trusted her. She manipulated him into stealing from his own father, the same way she manipulated him into betraying his own brother. My mother flinched. "Yes, I see that now." "And where is Jake now?" "At home, out on bail but barely. We had to mortgage the house to pay his legal fees. He's not handling any of this well." "Not handling it how?" She looked down at her hands, aged and spotted in ways I'd never noticed before. "He won't get out of bed, won't shower or shave or eat regular meals. Just lies there staring at the ceiling. Sometimes he cries. Sometimes he rages about how Sarah betrayed him, how Marcus was supposed to be his friend. And Dad, the heart attack was mild, but the stress is killing him. 27 years building that construction company, and now it might all disappear because he trusted his own son. The doctor says his blood pressure is dangerously high." I watched my mother's tears fall onto the scarred wooden table and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. "What do you want from me, Mom?" "Come home. Help us figure this out. You were always the smart one, the one who could solve problems and fix things. Maybe you can find a way to save the company or help Jake with his legal situation or clean up his mess like I always did. This is different. This is bigger than childhood squabbles or sibling rivalry. This could destroy everything our family built. I leaned back in the booth, studying this woman who'd raised me to believe that family loyalty trumped everything else, who'd taught me to put other people's needs before my own and consider that a virtue. Do you remember what you said to me at Christmas dinner when you gave Sarah my grandmother's ring? I said a lot of things that night. You said you'd gained a daughter and kept both your sons. You were so happy, Mom, so proud of how perfectly everything had worked out. She winced like I'd slapped her. I thought it was for the best. I thought everyone could be happy. Everyone except me. I thought you were happy too. You seemed so mature, so accepting. I was devastated. I was broken. I was planning my escape from all of you while you celebrated my replacement. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm, too filled with the weight of everything we'd never said to each other. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I failed you as a mother. I chose what seemed like the easy path instead of what was right. And now you want me to come back and make the hard choices for you. I want my family back, all of it. Both my sons working together to fix what went wrong. I thought about the life I'd built in Portland. The job that challenged me, the friends who accepted me, the woman who loved me without reservation. The therapy sessions where I'd learned to value my own happiness. The hiking trails where I'd discovered inner strength I'd never known I possessed. I have a life here, Mom, a good life, with people who see me as more than just the family problem solver. But we need you. You needed me 8 months ago when Jake was stealing from Dad and lying to everyone. You needed me when Sarah was manipulating him into betraying his family. Where was this desperate phone call then? She had no answer for that. You only need me now because Jake can't fix this himself and you're finally facing consequences you can't manage. Please, Barton. I know we don't deserve your help, but Jake is still your brother. Dan is still your father. We're still your family. I stood up suddenly exhausted by the weight of old obligations and misplaced guilt. No, you're not. Family doesn't do what you did to me. Family doesn't choose sides and rewrite history and ask someone to smile while they're being erased. Where are you going? Back to my life. My real life. With people who actually love me. I love you, she called as I walked toward the door. I've always loved you. I paused at the threshold looking back at this small, broken woman who'd somehow convinced herself that love and manipulation were the same thing. No, Mom, you love the idea of me, the responsible son who fixes problems and asks for nothing in return. But you've never loved the actual person I am because you've never bothered to find out who that is. Elena was waiting in her car as promised. She didn't ask questions as I climbed into the passenger seat, just reached over and held my hand while I stared out the window at my mother's figure disappearing into the distance. How do you feel? She asked finally. Free, I said, and meant it. But my phone started ringing as soon as we got back to my apartment. My father's number, which I'd blocked months ago, but which appeared now because he was calling from the hospital. Barton, thank God. Your mother said she found you. His voice sounded weak, strained in ways that made my chest tighten with involuntary concern. I heard about your heart attack. Are you okay? I'm fine. Just stress and high blood pressure. But son, I need to tell you something important. I'm listening. Your mother. She lied to you today about being sick. She's not dying, isn't even ill. She thought if she told you she had cancer or something serious, you'd come home out of guilt. I closed my eyes unsurprised by this final manipulation, but still stung by its calculated cruelty. I know you hate us, my father continued. I know we failed you in ways I'm only starting to understand, but I couldn't let her lie to you anymore. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth. Because maybe if I'd been honest with you 8 months ago instead of going along with your mother's version of events, none of this would have happened. Through the phone, I could hear the beeping of hospital monitors, the distant sound of nurses talking at their station. Dad, I need to go. The doctor's here for evening rounds, but Barton, I'm proud of you for building a new life. I'm proud of you for refusing to come back and clean up our mess. That takes more strength than I ever gave you credit for." He hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my Portland apartment with tears streaming down my face and Elena's arms around me. For the first time in 8 months, I cried for what I'd lost. Not Jake or Sarah or the life I'd planned, but the parents I'd thought I'd had, and the family I'd believed existed somewhere beneath all the dysfunction. And then I dried my tears and started planning a future that had nothing to do with any of them. Spring turned to summer in Portland with the kind of perfect weather that made me understand why people wrote songs about the Pacific Northwest. Elena and I spent weekends exploring wine country and camping on the coast, building memories uncontaminated by my past. But therapy with Dr. Steinberg was finally revealing the full scope of damage my family had inflicted over decades. "Tell me about high school," she said during a session in early July. What was Jake like then? I'd been avoiding this territory, focusing our conversations on recent events, rather than the foundational patterns that had shaped my entire life. But Elena had gently suggested that understanding the history might help me process the present. Jake was charismatic, funny. Everyone loved him immediately. Teachers, classmates, girls, other parents. He had this way of making people feel special when he paid attention to them. And I was the serious one. Good grades, responsible, reliable. I worked part-time at a grocery store to save money for college while Jake played sports and went to parties. Dr. Steinberg made notes on her tablet. How did your parents respond to these different approaches? The memories surfaced like bubbles rising to water's surface, impossible to push back down once they started coming. They worried about Jake, always. He'd get in trouble at school and they'd spend hours talking to teachers and principals finding ways to help him succeed. He'd fail tests and they'd hire tutors. He'd get caught drinking and they'd blame peer pressure. What about when you succeeded? They expected it. When I made honor roll, that was normal. When I got accepted to college with partial scholarships, that was what I was supposed to do. Did they celebrate your achievements? I searched my memory for evidence of parental pride in my accomplishments. Images flashed through my mind my high school graduation, where Jake's presence as a sophomore had somehow overshadowed my valedictorian speech. My college acceptance letter, which had arrived the same day Jake got suspended for cheating. So dinner conversation focused entirely on damage control for his situation. They were proud, I think, but quietly proud. Like it would be unseemly to make a big deal about something I was naturally good at. While Jake's smaller achievements were celebrated loudly, his C's were treated like A's. His participation in sports was more important than my academic awards. When he finally graduated high school with a 2.7 GPA, my parents threw him a bigger party than they'd thrown for any of my accomplishments. The pattern was so clear in hindsight that I wondered how I'd missed it for 28 years. "What's the psychological term for that?" I asked. "Scapegoating. Golden child syndrome. Jake was the golden child who could do no wrong, while you were the scapegoat who was held to impossible standards and blamed when things went wrong. But they said they loved us equally." I'm sure they believed that. Parents often don't recognize these dynamics while they're happening. They just respond to the personalities in front of them without realizing they're creating lifelong patterns. I left that session feeling like I'd been given new glasses that brought everything into focus. Over the following weeks, more memories surfaced. The time Jake crashed my car during his senior year, and somehow I got grounded for being irresponsible enough to lend it to him. The way my parents had expected me to share my college fund with Jake when he decided to attend community college because family helps family. How I'd been expected to help with his rent and car payments throughout his 20s while he figured out what he wanted to do with his life. "You were parentified," Dr. Steinberg explained, "made responsible for Jake's emotional and practical needs from a very young age. Your parents essentially turned you into a third parent instead of letting you be a child. Is that why the whole Sarah situation hurt so much, beyond the obvious betrayal? Partly, but it also represented the ultimate expression of a pattern you'd been living with your entire life. Jake's needs and desires mattered more than yours, and you were expected to sacrifice gracefully for his benefit. Elena noticed the change in me as these realizations crystallized. I became quieter, more introspective, processing 30 years of misunderstood family dynamics. "You're grieving," she observed one evening as we cooked dinner together in her apartment. "Not just for what they did to you recently, but for the childhood you never got to have." Is it that obvious? You've been carrying responsibility for other people's emotions since you were probably 5 years old. Of course you're grieving. You never got to just be a kid who made mistakes and was loved unconditionally. But the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. Marcus Tompkins called me on a Wednesday evening in late July. My college best friend, the one whose voicemail I'd reached the night I discovered Sarah and Jake together. The one who'd supposedly been traveling and couldn't talk. "Barton, man, I've been trying to work up the courage to call you for months." His voice sounded different, older, less confident than the Marcus I'd known for nearly a decade. "You got my number from TechFlow." "Yeah, look, I need to tell you something. About that night when you called me when everything went down with Sarah and Jake." My stomach clenched with sudden understanding. "You weren't traveling." "No, I was home, watching Netflix and eating leftover pizza. I ignored your call because, fuck, this is hard to say." "Just say it." "Jake had called me an hour before you did. He told me what happened, how you'd caught them together. But he also told me that if you contacted any of our mutual friends looking for support, I should make myself unavailable." "He what?" "He said he was going to work things out with the family, get them on his side, and that having outside support would just make you more stubborn about accepting the situation." I sat down heavily on my couch, the phone suddenly weighing 10 pounds in my hand. "He threatened you." "Not directly, but he made it clear that choosing sides would affect our friendship. And God, Barton, I was a coward. I was worried about being caught in the middle of family drama, so I just avoided the whole thing. For 8 months. I know how that sounds, but I kept telling myself it would blow over, that you guys would work it out, that my getting involved would just make things worse." Through the phone, I could hear Marcus breathing heavily, like confession was physically exhausting. "There's more," he continued. "Jake didn't just contact me. He reached out to half our college friends, told them his version of what happened. Made it sound like you were being unreasonably possessive and that Sarah had realized she'd made a mistake getting engaged to you. His version. He painted himself as the guy who fell in love despite trying not to, and you as the bitter ex who couldn't handle losing gracefully. By the time anyone might have thought to reach out to you, they'd all been convinced you were the villain in the story." I thought about all the friends who'd simply vanished from my life over the past months. People I'd assumed were too uncomfortable with the situation to maintain contact. People who'd apparently been told I was the problem. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I heard what happened with the embezzlement. Because Sarah disappeared with some guy named Marcus Rodriguez, and that's too much of a coincidence for comfort. Because I started wondering if Jake had manipulated me the same way he'd manipulated everyone else." "Rodriguez." I did some digging. Marcus Rodriguez doesn't exist. It's an alias Sarah's been using for a guy named Michael Ross. He's got a record of investment fraud in 3 states. They've been running this con together, targeting small family businesses through romantic manipulation. The room spun around me. Sarah was a con artist. Professional. They research targets, identify businesses with access to cash and family drama they can exploit. Jake was perfect younger son with something to prove, access to company accounts. Resentment toward his successful older brother. The whole thing was planned. From the beginning. Sarah probably targeted you initially, but switched to Jake when she realized he was more vulnerable and had better access to money. I closed my eyes and saw the past 2 years with horrifying clarity. Sarah's sudden interest in family dynamics, her questions about the construction company's finances, the way she'd encouraged Jake's resentment about being overshadowed by his older brother. They played everyone. Your parents, Jake, me, the whole family. They used our own dysfunction against us. I'm so sorry, Barton. I should have seen through it. Should have supported you instead of taking the easy way out. After I hung up, I sat in my Portland apartment, feeling something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Vindication. Not satisfaction exactly, but the profound relief of discovering that my instincts had been correct. Sarah and Jake's love story had been a lie. My family's betrayal had been based on carefully constructed manipulation. Elena found me there an hour later, still processing this final revelation. "How do you feel?" she asked, settling beside me on the couch. Validated, and also sad for all of them. Sad. They were all victims too in their way. Mom and Dad Jake, even the extended family who thought they were witnessing true love. Sarah and her partner exploited every weakness in our family system. That doesn't excuse how they treated you. No, it doesn't, but it explains it. Elena curled up against my side, her warmth anchoring me to the present. What are you going to do with this information? I considered calling my father, sharing what Marcus had told me, perhaps offering to help with Jake's legal defense, now that I understood the scope of the manipulation. But then I imagined the conversation, the attempts to guilt me into coming home. The expectations that I'd fix everyone's problems, the assumption that information changed the fundamental dynamics between us. Nothing, I said finally. I'm going to do absolutely nothing. Really. They made their choices based on the information they had. Those choices revealed who they really are and what I actually mean to them. The fact that they were manipulated doesn't change any of that. Elena smiled against my shoulder. You've learned something important. What's that? That you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. But even as I spoke those words, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. Because 3 days later, Elena came home from work with news that would change everything again. I've been accepted, she said, holding an official-looking letter in trembling hands. The veterinary program in New Zealand. They want me to start in 6 months. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what this meant. It's a 2-year program, she continued. Advanced training in large animal surgery, something I've dreamed about since I was a kid. That's incredible. Congratulations. She sat beside me on her couch, the letter still clutched in her hands. There's something else. What? I want you to come with me. The words hung in the air between us like a bridge to an entirely different life. Elena, I know it's crazy. We've only been together 8 months, but Barton, what we have, it's real. It's the kind of love that makes people do impossible things. I looked at this woman who'd helped me discover who I could be when I wasn't defined by other people's needs and expectations, who'd shown me what healthy love felt like, who was offering me a chance to start completely over in a place where no one knew my history or my mistakes. New Zealand. 12,000 miles away from all the people who never learned how to value you properly. I thought about my job at TechFlow, my apartment in Portland, the life I'd carefully built from nothing. All of it suddenly seemed like a stepping stone rather than a destination. When do you need an answer? Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet box that made my heart stop. Actually, she said, I was hoping you might give me one instead. 1 year later, I stood on a beach in Auckland, New Zealand, watching Elena check the vitals of a pregnant mare, while the southern hemisphere sun painted everything golden. The Tasman Sea stretched endlessly toward Australia, and the air smelled like salt and eucalyptus and possibilities I'd never imagined. My phone buzzed with a message from Rachel Torres at TechFlow. Latest campaign for the coffee roaster is performing incredibly. Clients are asking specifically for the strategy you developed before you left. Hope you're happy wherever you are. I was, happier than I'd ever thought possible. Elena finished her examination and walked toward me across the black sand, her face bright with satisfaction. Healthy foal, perfect positioning. She should deliver naturally in the next few days. And your final semester. Completed yesterday. I'm officially a certified large animal surgeon. She held up her hand, still steady despite the exhausting 2-year program. Ready to start our practice. Mitchell Vasquez Veterinary Services had been Elena's idea, but I'd thrown myself into the business planning with the same intensity I'd once reserved for other people's problems. We'd found the perfect property 30 miles outside Auckland, rolling hills suitable for horses and cattle, a converted barn that would serve as our clinic, and a farmhouse that felt like home the moment we'd walked through the front door. Any word from the bank about the final loan approval? Approved this morning. We can sign papers next week and start moving equipment. Elena grabbed my hands and spun us both around on the beach, her laughter mixing with the sound of waves. After everything I'd been through, joy still felt fragile, like something that might disappear if I held it too tightly. I have something for you, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. More good news. Better than good news. I'd been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Not because I was uncertain about our future, but because I'd wanted to give Elena the proposal she deserved. Thoughtful, meaningful, free from the shadows of my past. The ring was nothing like the traditional diamond I'd chosen for Sarah. Instead, I'd worked with a local artisan to create something unique, a band of New Zealand Panamu jade, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars. Elena Vasquez, I said, dropping to one knee on the warm sand. You saved my life without even trying. You showed me what love looks like when it's not conditional or manipulative or designed to serve someone else's agenda. Will you marry me and build something beautiful together? Her yes was immediate and joyful and accompanied by tears that sparkled in the sunset light. We were planning our engagement party when the letter arrived. It had been forwarded through my old Portland address, then through TechFlow, then through Elena's veterinary school, traveling halfway around the world to find me. The return address simply read, D. Mitchell, and I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity won. The letter was from my father, handwritten on lined notebook paper in his careful block letters. Barton, I hope this finds you well and happy. Your mother hired another private investigator to track you down, but I asked him to provide only an address for mailing purposes. I wanted to write to you myself without her involvement. Jake was sentenced to 18 months in minimum security prison and 5 years probation. The business is gone dissolved to pay back what he stole. Your mother and I are living in a small apartment now, both working part-time jobs to make ends meet. Sarah and her partner were arrested in Nevada trying to run the same con on a landscaping company there. Turns out her real name is Sandra Mills, and she has a history of targeting family businesses through romantic manipulation. Everything we thought we knew about her was a lie. I'm not writing to ask you to come back or forgive us or help with our situation. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything. You saw through the manipulation when the rest of us were blind. You maintained your dignity when we asked you to sacrifice it. You chose truth over comfort. I'm proud of you for building a new life. I'm proud of you for refusing to clean up our mess. Most of all, I'm proud of you for becoming the man I should have helped you become instead of holding you back. Your mother asks about you constantly. She wants to write to you herself to apologize and try to rebuild some kind of relationship. I've told her that ship has sailed, that we lost the right to your love when we chose convenience over courage. But if you're ever willing to accept the words of a foolish old man who failed his son when it mattered most, I'm sorry. I love you. And I understand why you'll never come back. Be well, son. Dad. I read the letter twice, then walked outside to where Elena was planning flower arrangements for our engagement party. The late afternoon sun streamed through our kitchen windows, illuminating seed packets and garden catalogs spread across the table. Everything okay? She asked, looking up from a notebook filled with sketches and measurements. I handed her the letter without comment. She read it carefully, her expression shifting from curiosity to sadness, to something approaching respect. How do you feel? At peace, I said, and realized I meant it completely. There was no desire for revenge, no satisfaction in their suffering, no temptation to return and help them rebuild. Just a profound sense of closure that allowed me to set down the last weight I'd been carrying. Your father sounds like he finally understands what happened. Understanding and taking responsibility are different things. He understands now because the consequences finally reached him personally. Elena nodded, setting the letter aside. What do you want to do? Nothing. But I'm glad he wrote it. It confirms that leaving was the right choice. 2 weeks later, our engagement party took place in the hills outside Auckland, surrounded by the community Elena and I had built together. Her colleagues from veterinary school, my new clients from the digital marketing consultancy. I'd started neighbors who'd become friends, fellow hiking enthusiasts who'd shown us hidden waterfalls and secret beaches. No one at this gathering had known me as the responsible older brother or the accommodating fiancé or the family problem solver. They knew me as Barton, the man who told stories about rescue animals, who could plan marketing campaigns that helped small businesses thrive, who hiked mountains for pleasure and cooked elaborate meals just because he enjoyed feeding people he cared about. As the sun set over our celebration, I stood to address our guest with Elena's hand in mine, and my grandmother's engagement ring safely locked away in a drawer at home. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I began looking out at faces that reflected genuine affection and respect. 2 years ago, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it was about blood relations and shared history and loyalty regardless of circumstances. The crowd quieted, sensing the weight behind my words. But Elena taught me that family is something you choose. It's built on respect and honesty, and the daily decision to value each other's happiness. It's not about obligation, or guilt, or maintaining peace at any cost. I raised my glass of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, catching the last rays of sunlight. So, here's to chosen family. Here's to the courage it takes to walk away from people who will never value you properly. Here's to building something real with people who see your worth. The toast was echoed by 40 voices, and as I looked around at these people who'd become my true family, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost anything when I'd left my old life behind. I'd gained everything. Elena and I were married 6 months later on this same beach where I'd proposed, surrounded by the same chosen family who'd celebrated our engagement. Her dress was simple and elegant. My suit was linen the color of sea foam, and our vows were promises we'd already been keeping for 2 years. Our wedding night was spent in a beach house overlooking the Tasman Sea, planning the veterinary practice that would serve farmers and horse breeders throughout the North Island. We fell asleep to the sound of waves and woke up to a sunrise that painted our future bright with possibility. The practice thrived beyond our wildest expectations. Elena's surgical skills and my marketing expertise proved to be the perfect combination for building a business that mattered. We treated prize-winning racehorses and beloved farm dogs with equal care, traveling to remote properties where veterinary services were scarce, building relationships with families who appreciated our commitment to both animals and their owners. 2 years after our wedding, as I was updating our website with testimonials from satisfied clients, I received one final piece of correspondence from my past. This time it was from Jake. The letter had been forwarded through the same circuitous route, taking months to reach me. Barton, I know I have no right to contact you, and I don't expect you to read this much, less respond. But my counselor says part of making amends is acknowledging the harm I caused, even if forgiveness isn't possible. I understand now that Sarah was using me. I understand that she targeted our family, deliberately exploited our weaknesses, and manipulated me into betraying you. But understanding doesn't excuse what I did. I was jealous of you my entire life. Jealous of your intelligence, your responsibility, your ability to make people proud without even trying. When Sarah showed interest in me, it felt like the first time I'd won something you'd lost. I didn't care that winning meant destroying you. I told myself you'd be fine, that you were strong enough to handle anything. I used your strength as an excuse to be weak. I'm out of prison now, living in a halfway house and working construction for a company that hired me despite my record. Mom and Dad are getting by. They talk about you sometimes, wonder what kind of life you built, whether you're happy. I hope you are. I hope you found someone who loves you properly and treats you the way I never learned how to. I hope you built something beautiful far away from all of us. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even want it, because that would require you to carry the burden of absolving me when I should carry the weight of what I did. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand the difference between love and selfishness. That I recognize the man you always were, and the brother I never managed to be. Be well, Barton. You deserved better than all of us. Jake. I read the letter once, then handed it to Elena without comment. She read it carefully, her expression thoughtful. That's actually a real apology, she said finally. No deflection, no requests for forgiveness, no attempts to minimize what he did. It is. How does it make you feel? I considered the question while watching our dogs chase each other around the paddock where Elena treated horses. We'd rescued them from an Auckland shelter, two border collie mixes who'd been abandoned and then found each other becoming inseparable. Grateful, I said finally. Grateful? That I found the strength to leave before prison and therapy taught Jake how to be honest, that I didn't wait around hoping he'd become the brother I deserved. Elena nodded, understanding. You saved yourself. We saved each other. And that I realized was the deepest truth of our story. Not that I'd escaped a toxic family or found love after betrayal, but that Elena and I had chosen each other every single day, building something solid and honest and sustainable. That evening, as we planned our expansion into a second clinic in Christchurch, I thought about the question Dr. Steinberg had asked during one of our final sessions in Portland. What do you want your life to look like in 5 years? At the time, I'd struggled to envision anything beyond basic survival and healing, but sitting in our kitchen with Elena, surrounded by the life we'd built together, I could see our future with perfect clarity, more rescued animals, a thriving business that served rural communities, maybe children who would grow up understanding that love was supposed to feel safe and stable and unconditional. Thank you, I said suddenly, interrupting Elena's calculations about equipment costs for the new clinic. For what? For showing me the difference between existing and living. For proving that some people actually mean it when they say they love you. Elena reached across the table and took my hands in hers, the same hands that performed delicate surgery on injured animals, and held me through nightmares about family gatherings I'd never attend again. Thank you, she said, for having the courage to walk away from people who didn't deserve you. If you hadn't, we never would have found each other. Outside our kitchen window, the New Zealand countryside stretched toward mountains and ocean and a future limited only by our imagination. Inside, surrounded by evidence of the life we'd chosen together, I finally understood the deepest lesson of my story. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who will never value you properly, even if they share your blood. True family is chosen, not inherited. And authentic love feels nothing like the substitute I'd spent 28 years accepting. I'd lost a family and gained a life. The trade had been worth everything. As I finish telling you this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever found yourself in a relationship, romantic, family, or friendship where you constantly give more than you receive? Where your needs always come second to someone else's drama? Where you're expected to forgive repeatedly while others never change their behavior? If so, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve people who celebrate your successes instead of taking them for granted. You deserve love that doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect, rather than one-sided sacrifice. Please take a moment to comment below and share your thoughts about choosing family versus accepting the one you were born into. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from toxic relationships for your own well-being? Your story might help someone else find the courage to choose themselves. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button. It helps more people find these conversations about healthy relationships and personal boundaries. And if you'd like to hear more stories about people who found the courage to rebuild their lives, please subscribe to stay connected with our community. Most importantly, please share this story with anyone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's okay to prioritize our own happiness and that we're worthy of love that doesn't hurt. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to belonging. May you find the courage to choose the love you deserve and the wisdom to recognize it when it arrives. Until next time, remember your worth isn't determined by how much others are willing to sacrifice for you, but by how much you're willing to sacrifice your peace for them. Choose wisely.